Alrighty, guys. We have our guest that we were going to have on last night. I apologize again. Some of y'all may end up hearing it. It is raining like cats and dogs here on my end, but we've got it going on nonetheless. We've got football games going on, so hopefully we've got a lot of people in the live tonight. If not, all of y'all that watch later on, if y'all end up having questions after the stream in the comments, go ahead and leave questions and I will be sure to get them to Mr. Gary, and we'll definitely end up, I'm sure, having him back after his visit tonight because he's going to be a wonderful guest. I already know right off the bat. But today, or I should say tonight, our guest is Mr. Gary Linderer. He's not only a veteran, a LRP, a Ranger, but also he is an accomplished author. This is Phantom Warriors, just one of his book. This is in a series. This is book, I believe that is book one. And then he also helped write with another two Rangers, Mr. Ray Martinez and Mr. Ken Miller, in the Six Silent Men in this series. And I've got these two. I've got to get the other two by Mr. Ken Miller, and one more, my book two by Mr. Gary, as well as, gosh, I'm sorry, it's on the bookshelf, but Eyes of the Eagle, 1968 and 1969, two books about his personal tours in Vietnam as a LRP first and then a Ranger. It is two outstanding books. I finished them here recently and have begun Phantom Warriors, just outstanding, and I cannot wait to hear some of the stories and some of the history of these two great organizations in Vietnam that sometimes us SOG fans and SOG historians, if you will, they like to parenthesize, kind of overlook. And boy, is that a mistake, because they were into some heavy duty stuff. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Mr. Gary and let him start us off for tonight. Mr. Gary, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Bud. Probably the first thing I should do is give a little history of the Long Range Patrol and the Rangers in Vietnam. In 1965, when the American involvement became more conventional, they got away from the advisors. The 101st Airborne Division's 1st Brigade was one of the first units to go over. General Westmoreland decided that we weren't fighting a conventional war at the time. We needed a reconnaissance element to our military units that could go out and locate the guerrilla forces. The 1st Brigade, which was operating in 2 Corps at the time around Benoit, he decided to form a provisional reconnaissance platoon for 1st Brigade. That started in July of 65. It was a volunteer unit. Guys could volunteer from any of the 101st units to go to this to farm this provisional unit. We had truck drivers, infantrymen, clerks, all volunteered to join this unit. It was tough getting in. You had to be physically able and hopefully a background in that type of service. When that unit was set up, other units in Vietnam, 173rd Airborne Brigade, 25th Infantry Division, the Big Red One, the 9th Infantry Division, also started farming provisional LRP units consisting of volunteers. In the 101st, everybody was airborne qualified. It took about 3 months to establish that unit. Just after the 101st set up theirs, the 173rd set up their unit. They were actually the first unit to pull a combat patrol. I think that was in August it was September of 65. The units performed various reconnaissance patrols in 2 Corps, in I Corps, in 3 Corps. I shouldn't say I Corps. 2 Corps and 3 Corps and 4 Corps is where they initially performed. I Corps didn't come along till later when the 101st moved north. The Marines had a force battalion reconnaissance, which primarily did the same thing as the long-range patrol companies, but they did it with 8-man teams. The Army used 5- and 6-man teams, and in some instances, they actually used 4-man teams. The terrain dictated what type of patrolling went on. I know the 9th Infantry Division, which patrolled in the Delta, very few of their missions lasted longer than a day, mainly because of the terrain, the wetness, the predominance of civilians in the area. So most of their patrols were one-day patrols where they went out and mainly moved at night and hid during the day watching a village or something like that. There was a lot of misuse of the early LRRPs. They were used for things other than reconnaissance because the infantry units that they were assigned to didn't know how to use LRRPs, didn't know how to use long-range patrollers. Later on in the war, when the North Vietnamese Army started sending their forces south, everything changed. It was no longer guerrillas that we were looking for, but NVA troops. They were in larger units. They moved a lot in the daytime. The long-range patrol teams actually started operating in 6-man teams in most places and stayed out for anywhere from 3 to 7 days on a mission. Changed everything in 67. The LRRPs were the provisional units that operated early in the war. When the divisions came to Vietnam, the full divisions, it went to LRP, long-range patrol, instead of long-range reconnaissance patrolling. That happened mainly in 67 and lasted up till 1969, when all of the LRP units were converted to Ranger companies. The mission didn't change that much during the transition from LRRPs to Rangers because it happened overnight. I was there in 68 as an LRP, and in January 31st of 1969, all of the LRP units became Ranger companies overnight. Later on in the war, in 70, 71, when it was primarily NVA after 10 of 68, it was primarily NVA that we were fighting. And at that point in time, all of the Ranger companies took on other missions, bomb damage assessment patrols, rescue missions, going in after downed chopper pilots, ambush missions, trying to start a battle where the American forces could pour on after contact was made. These were the Ranger type missions that happened in 70, 71. And it was also the period where our type of unit suffered its heaviest casualties. The main difference between us and SOG, Studies and Observation Groups, was they were primarily special forces, and they operated with indigenous personnel. We very seldom went out with indigenous personnel. Usually if we did, it was a Kit Carson scout or maybe 1 or 2 people. Our missions were always within South Vietnam. There were occasions we went into Cambodia or Laos, but it was unusual for us to do so. SOG teams consistently, sometimes they ran 12-man teams with 9 indigenous and 3 Americans. They were almost always in Cambodia, South Vietnam, North Vietnam, or Laos. That was the main difference in SOG. Their missions tended to be a little hairier than ours because they were usually confronted with larger enemy units, and they were across the border. It took longer to get reaction force or a helicopter extraction for them. So it was much more dangerous what they did than what we did. Of course, dead is dead. I can't say they lost a lot of teams. They lost a lot of people. As far as I know, in Vietnam, we only lost 2 entire teams. The 101st lost an entire team, and the 25th Infantry Division lost an entire team. I'm not aware of any other LRRP units that lost an entire team. We also operated sometimes in heavy teams, a 12-man team, where 2 teams would go out together, usually because of the mission or because of the area was more dangerous than normal. I was on a patrol one time with a heavy team where we got surrounded by a couple of NVA companies, and it was pretty hairy getting out of there. We ended up losing 4 killed, and everybody else on the heavy team was wounded. That did happen on occasion. The bad thing about being a LRP, if you got in a firefight, you were almost always surrounded and outnumbered by quite large numbers. So we either had to fight our way out, escape and evade, or we had to be rescued, or a reaction force had to come in and relieve us. I was there at the height of the war, 68, 69. I was a volunteer like most other guys that served in long-range patrol companies and ranger companies. I was airborne qualified, as were most of the guys that came over with me. When I got there in summer of 68, the 101st Airborne Division was still an airborne unit. It changed shortly after that, primarily because the 173rd had taken some heavy casualties, and most of the replacements coming over that were airborne qualified went to the 173rd. There wasn't enough people coming over with our qualification to keep the 101st pure airborne. The 82nd had also sent a brigade over after 10 of 68, and they were all airborne, and they were also ticking up new recruits coming over that were airborne qualified. So the 101st one, airborne, or air assault, I should say. Let me. I covered the history basically of the long range patrol and rangers. There were three phases: LRP, and rangers that lasted throughout the war. When I decided to write my first 2 books, they were about my tour in Vietnam. Eyes of the Eagle and Eyes Behind the Lines. Black Berets and Painted Faces was the military book club hardback version of the 2 books that I wrote. When I wrote them as a single book, but Ivy Books, who bought the rights to it, decided to bring it out in 2 paperbacks because it was too large for a single paperback. Military Book Club published the hardcover combination of those 2 books. When the books came out, I wasn't even intending on writing books. I went to my first reunion in 1986, and after that reunion, a lot of my memories came back, and my fiance, who became my wife, had saved all the letters that I had sent home. I didn't want to go to that first reunion in '86. I'd forgotten names, I'd forgotten people's faces, I'd put on weight, and I thought, I don't want to do this. She had asked me, she said, why don't you sit down and read all the letters I kept, and maybe it'll help your memory. So I did that the night before I left for the reunion. And it was like reading a diary. My letters were day to day and told what missions I went on and who was on the team with me and the basics of what happened on that patrol. When I came back from the reunion, I decided to put all this in a diary format so that my sons, I had 4 boys, that my sons could read what I went through in the war. It took me about 6 months. I hand wrote it on yellow legal pads. And a friend of mine, Ken Miller, who was a good buddy in Vietnam, had already published a book called Tiger the LRP Dog, which was a big hit. It was the first book about LRPs. And even though it was a novel, it was based a lot on fact. When I had finished my diary, Ken called me and said, how's the book coming? I said, what book? I told him what I had done. He said, how about sending it to me? And I said, Ken, it's handwritten. He said, copy it and send it to me. So I copied it and I sent it to him. And he said, this is pretty good stuff. He said, I'm going to send it to a publisher friend of mine. And I said, well, I'm not even finished with it. He said, let me do that. He said, I'll tell you what. He said, just type up the best 2 chapters you've got and I'll send that off. He said, you'll have plenty of time. He said, it normally takes him 6 months to read anything. He said, you'll have plenty of time to finish it. So I bought a used Underwood typewriter, and I typed up the November 20th and the November 4th days. I had pretty hairy missions, 1968. And I sent that to Ken, and he forwarded it to Owen Locke at Ivy Books. And I think he sent it in on a Thursday. The following Tuesday, I get a phone call from Owen Locke. And he says, Gary Linderer? I said, yeah. He said, this is Owen Locke. And I didn't recognize the name. I said, who is this? And he said, Owen Locke. And I said, what do you want? And he said, I'll buy your book. He said, send me the rest of it. And I said, "Who is this?" I said, "Miller, is this you?" I never realized it was the publisher. He said, "This is Owen Locke at Ivy Books." He said, "I read your 2 chapters." He said, "I'll buy the book." He said, "Send me the rest of it." And when I finally realized who I was talking to, I said, "Look," I said, "the rest of it's handwritten. That's the only 2 chapters I've got done." And he said, "Well, send me the handwritten part." So I packaged it up and I sent it off to him. And he called me back 2 weeks later and said, "We got a problem." He said, "There's too much here for a book." And I thought, well, that figures. And he said, "We'll make 2 books out of it. We'll bring it out in 2 books." So I signed the contract and published the 2 books. And they came out like 6 months apart. And I had a lot of phone calls from people wanting to know what the second half of my tour was about. And I wasn't very, very happy that there was a big gap between the 2 books coming out. But that's the way they did it. After the books were out for a while, Military Book Club contacted Ivy and wanted to buy the rights to publish the hardcover version, which was black berets and painted faces. And Ivy sold them 20,000, the right to publish 20,000 books, which sold very quickly. And Ivy wanted to do another 20,000, or excuse me, Military Book Club wanted to do another 20,000 books. And Ivy felt it was competing with the paperbacks, and they refused to do a second round. About a year after that, I was talking to Ken Miller and Ray Martinez, guys that had served ahead of me. And we had decided to write the history of the 101st LRP Rangers in Vietnam. And since it was such a large and detailed history, we decided that each one of us would do a separate portion. So Ray Martinez, who served with 1st Brigade LRPs, would write the history of the 1st Brigade LRPs. I would do Ken Miller would do the F Company, 58th Infantry, LRPs, and I would do the final transition of the L Company 75th Rangers for the 101st. We wrote those books. They came out fairly close together. They got a lot of good reviews. And when we finished that, I had guys from other LRP Ranger companies contact me and say, "How come nobody's writing our history?" And it was a fair supposition. There were 13 LRP Ranger companies in Vietnam, and there was a book about Charlie Rangers written by a couple of guys, but nothing really about the definitive study of all the LRP Ranger companies. So I decided to do a series where I would do one mission story on each of the long range patrol LRP, and Ranger companies in Vietnam, just so that they had somebody writing something about them. So I spent about 6 months interviewing vets from different LRP Ranger companies, and I finally compiled 2 books about all of the LRP Ranger companies that served in Vietnam, which is the Phantom Warrior series, books 1 and 2. Ray Martinez and I and Miller, we call that series about the 101st the 6 Silent Men series. And again, Ray wrote book 1, Ken Miller wrote book 2, and I wrote book 3. I was pushed to write other books. That was never my goal. I didn't want to become an author, a multi-book author in the first place. So what I did is I used my connections with the publishers I had to help other long-range patrol guys and Rangers get their books published. I think all in all, there was like 42 guys that I helped get their books published, and even a few outside the LRP Ranger community. Richie Burns was a good friend of mine. He was a Pathfinder in Vietnam. I helped him get his book published. There was a school teacher, a friend of mine, who was drafted at 26 years old, married with 2 kids, who left a high school teaching job. I helped him get his book published. It was Classrooms to Claymores. I also encouraged 2 of our pilots, Wild Bill Meacham and W.T. Grant, to get their books published. They supported us. Matter of fact, most of us probably wouldn't be here if it weren't for them. And it was an honor to help them get their books published. My brother, who was a journalist during the Vietnam War, served most of his time in Hawaii. He approached me about doing a publication called Behind the Lines. We started out as a newspaper, 36-page black and white newspaper, went to a multicolored newspaper, and finally to green, white, and black magazine, and finally do a full color magazine. And we published that for 5 years. It was basically stories, behind the line stories about special operations units. It was a bi-monthly publication. We ended up with about 25,000 subscribers, and we published it for 5 years until I had a heart attack and had to stop putting it out. I think I still do some editing, and Ray Martinez and I just finished a book about David Dolby, which is Pen and Sword Books bought the rights to it, which will be coming out in about 6 or 8 months, about a Medal of Honor recipient from the 1st Cav who won the Medal of Honor at LZ English, and then ended up serving 5 more tours in special operations units after receiving the Medal of Honor. I knew Dave Dolby. He passed away before the book came out, but he was a good friend of mine. Ended up serving a tour with Charlie Company Rangers, and it was an honor to help Ray Martinez. I did the editing on the book. Ray wrote it, and again, Pen and Sword Books bought the rights to it. Ray was a good friend of Dave's also, and since Dave was a Charlie Company Ranger, it was a special honor for both of us to get that book published. That's about all I can say about the Long Range Patrol Rangers. That's kind of our tradition. There were 13 companies that served in Vietnam. Some of them were provisional companies. Some of them were just platoons. Some of them were full companies. Some of them were reinforced. 2 of them were reinforced companies that served with the 1st and 2nd Field Force units. They were commanded by majors, had 200 and something men in the company. We had 106 allocated, except we hardly ever had that number. We usually ran up to 8 teams in our company at a time, which means we usually had 2 or 3 teams in the field at any given point in time. We didn't have enough helicopter support to have all 8 teams out at one time. That was a dangerous situation if that happened. I remember times where we had 4 or 5 teams in the field at one time, and that was dangerous enough. If one team got in contact, the other teams had to go dog and lay still while that one team was reinforced or rescued. I'll tell you, Bud, I'm open for questions anytime if anybody wants to ask any. That's pretty much the history of the LRP Rangers in Vietnam.
That was absolutely outstanding because, we're thank goodness you're our first Ranger guest, LRP guest that we've had, and no better. Oh no, his phone's been giving him a lot of trouble, guys. Hang on 1 second, he'll pop back up. I don't know what's wrong with it. At first, it was only working when me and him were on the phone together. So just hang on once. Here he comes. There we go.
I don't know what happened.
It's fine. It's dadgum technology. You know how it'll do. Everything's fine. We're gonna start getting some questions in, but I thought there's really so many good ones that I'll get the ball rolling a little bit. I was interested in, as you mentioned, the early LRPs before the Ranger transition. They didn't really know how to utilize them correctly. What mission set was going on. And as I was saying, we're sadly real oriented on SOG because most of our guests have been SOG men or Force Recon men. Can you kind of explain how they went wrong and what kind of missions they were receiving, and then how it changed and how y'all got in your stride in 1968, 69 and the kind of missions you were running?
SOG's missions were more definitive than ours. They knew what their mission was. They were controlled by MACV. They knew what their mission was. We had a lot of generals and colonels that had no concept of how to use a long-range reconnaissance. They were more oriented towards battalion reconnaissance companies, and which operated closer to a friendly unit and it was usually a larger element than ours, where we ran a 6-man team. A battalion reconnaissance units usually consisted of a platoon or at least a reinforced squad. They were also closer to the parent unit. We operated anywhere from 20 to 40 kilometers away from the nearest friendlies. So it would take a helicopter, gunships, a half hour to reach us a lot of times, or to extract our team. We usually had fire support from an artillery site, which SOG often did not have. That was one of the major differences. We were under the umbrella of friendly fire from an artillery unit. There were times the battleship New Jersey was the artillery unit that supported us because they were the only ones that could reach us. And sitting on a gun target line for an artillery round from the New Jersey was quite an experience. We also used airstrikes, got helicopter gunships, as SOG did also. We didn't get too often. We didn't get A1 support that SOG got from the Vietnamese Air Force. Most of our gunship support was from a Huey Hog or a Cobra, and there were many times we used up quite a few of those trying to get out of a situation. SOG did a lot more running than we did. Usually, if we got in a fight, we'd try to run to the nearest LZ, but a long-range two-day escape, E&E didn't happen that often to our teams. We had better or helicopter support than they did, and we usually got to a near LZ and got lifted out. We did come out on strings quite often, or come out on a ladder. That was not unusual in our situation. A lot of times there were no LZs available to get picked up, so string extractions and ladder extractions were normal for us. Only having to get 6 people out was a lot easier than getting a team of 15 people out. So it made extracting us a little simpler than a SOG team. If they had 15 people on the ground, it took 5 helicopters to get them all out on a string extraction. We didn't have that problem. Most of my missions were in the mountains. I didn't know what level ground was till I got home from Vietnam and found out that floor of my house was level. We did a lot of climbing. We had to take everything in with us for a 3 to 7 day mission. A lot of times it involved carrying a lot of water. Most of us carried a lot of ammo and a lot of frags because you had to stand off the enemy until the helicopters got there. And 6 guys couldn't do that too long unless they had a lot of ammo with them. There were a couple of missions. I carried 40 magazines with me, which was a lot of weight. But the missions were hairy enough that I had this fear of running out of ammo. Even today, when I go deer hunting, I take 50 rounds with me. And it's stupid, and my guys I hunt with think I'm crazy, but it's just a habit I got into, and I had this fear of running out of ammo. I've never killed 50 deer, by the way. I carried a lot of frags, too. I usually carried 8 frags. Sometimes a Woolly Peter, which almost got us killed on a mission. I won't talk about that. Sometimes I carried a concussion grenade, which almost did get us killed on a mission. Just, when you're out there and you're surrounded, I think there's an innate fear in all of us that running out of ammo is probably the worst thing that can happen to you. We had a pact on my team and most of the other teams that we did not want to be captured alive. That was the last thing in the world any of us wanted. So we had a death pact that if we were wounded and couldn't fight anymore, before our team would run off and leave us, they'd finish us off. That sounds crazy today, but when we made that pact back then, we were dead serious about that. I don't think we realized the ramifications of being killed by your own guys, but it made sense at the time. We actually, my unit did have 2 guys captured. One, we never heard what happened to him. It was in 1970. He was captured on a mission, and the other guy was also captured on the mission. He was a Samoan, and he was released in 1973 with a main release of prisoners. he tried to. We had a team surrounded for 2 days, and the reaction force that came in also got pinned down, and 2 helicopters got shot down trying to get these guys out. And they were finally rescued by volunteers from our company that fought their way up to the top of that hill and rescued them. The 2 guys that were missing tried to go for water, and one of them, gunshots were heard, and he was never announced as being captured. The other guy actually was captured, the Samoan. So both those guys disappeared on the same mission. So we don't know if the other guy was killed or was captured and died in captivity. We never heard. His name was James Champion. Isako Malo was the other guy that was captured. And like I said, he was released in 73. We had a lot of Native Americans in the company. At one time, there were 8 of them in my unit. Billy Walkabout was one of them, Cherokee kid, 18 years old, wrestler from Oklahoma City. Got his Distinguished Service Cross on a mission. I was with him. Should have got a Medal of Honor, and it ruined his life. He never bounced back from that patrol. Partly, I think, because of his age and the trauma that he went through. We were quite a mix of individuals. I grew up in a small town on a small farm and did a lot of hunting and fishing growing up. I was very comfortable in the woods. And we had quite a few guys in the company that came from the Midwest and the South that had grown up hunting and fishing. But we also had city boys who were street smart. I wonder how they were good in the field, because they didn't learn that in the city, but they were hardcore and learned how to not snore and learned how to walk silently, and were good guys in a firefight. So we were quite a mix of people. Most of my time was spent in I-Corps, which was up around the DMZ in the middle of the Ashall Valley. That's where I pulled most of my missions. Some of the guys down south, like I said, 1st Infantry Division, most of their missions were in rice paddies and swamps and around villages. They had no mountains to worry about. Some of the guys in 2 Corps were in heavy, dense jungles with triple canopy, where you couldn't see the sky, and it was dark in the middle of the day in triple canopy. So everything was different. I mean, depending on where you pulled your missions, when I sit and talk to Rangers from other companies and learners from other companies, I'm fascinated by what they tell me. I helped Jim, I won't mention his last name, but he was a good friend of mine from the 9th Infantry Division. He served a year in Vietnam, ended up at Fort Leonard Wood after Vietnam. I actually ran into him at Fort Leonard Wood. I pulled body escort on a 101st guy that was killed over there. I had to bring his body back to Kirkland, Washington. Jim was the guy that signed my orders, got my orders cut for me in range transportation. And we did not know this at the time. I found out years later. He pulled 138 missions in 1 year. I pulled 28 missions in 1 year. I had asked Jim, I said, how is that possible? He said, well, most of my missions were 1 day or at the most overnight. He said, we didn't wear rucksacks. We just wore LBE and took 1 meal with us and carried 2 canteens of water. And I said, you're kidding me. He said, no. He said, we'd go out at last light and come out early in the morning. And I said, well, I don't understand. He said, well, if you stayed out longer than a day or two, you had trench foot. He said it was just we're wet constantly. We'd go out and watch a village to see if the VC were using that village. He said, sometimes I'd come back and go pull another mission the next day. And I thought, my God, what a difference from what we did. Our missions were 3 to 7 days. We had to hump our own water and the food. We fought. I never saw a Viet Cong. Everybody we fought were NVA. You never saw hardly any NVA. So, I mean, the time frame and where you were located depended a lot on how you patrol. Our leadership, our guys that became team leaders, most of them went to MACB Recondo School, which was put on by Special Forces. They set that school up to train SOG people and reconnaissance people. And a lot of our guys that were team leader material went through there. I had a date for SOG Recondo School myself in December of 68 but I was wounded November 20th in 68 and missed my class date. When I got out of the hospital a month later, I had less than a year or 6 months left in Vietnam. And you had to have over 6 months left when you graduated Recondo School to get an appointment to go there. So I didn't get to go to MACV Recondo School. I did become a team leader in March of 69, basically because I'd had enough experience and I was an E5. So I got my own team. We were short of qualified team leaders. I didn't have the formal training on calling in artillery or radio communication, but I had picked up enough of it serving as an assistant team leader that I was able to do the job. MACV Recondo School was a 3-week school in the Trang taught by Special Forces. It was kind of modeled after the Alamo Scout training in World War II. They also went through a 3-week course. The main difference in the two courses is that the Alamo Scouts learned how to insert from a submarine. Wasn't a lot of demand for that in Vietnam, so that was not taught in MACV Recondo School. It was a 3-week course that culminated in an actual live mission outside in the Trang with a Special Forces advisor going out with a team. And during that mission, you pulled different positions on that patrol. There were people that were killed on those training missions, and there were people, I shouldn't call it a training mission because it was a live mission. And there were a lot of times where Larry Chambers, a good friend of mine, captured an NBA officer while on that patrol. I wish I could have attended that school. It probably would have made me a better team leader. The guys that graduated were highly regarded in the Long Range Patrol and the Rangers.
We've got a slew of questions, and I'll be throwing some pictures up all along that come up because some have asked about gear. But to start it off, Galil would like to know what was the most sophisticated enemy infrastructure, tunnel, or bunker complex that you encountered on a patrol?
We didn't see a lot of tunnels. Those were mainly down south. Digging tunnels where I was with natural caves, were probably better than tunnels. It was too rocky a ground and too mountainous. The NVA weren't big tunnel people. They did underground bunkers, but they didn't dig a lot of tunnels. Most of the tunnels were down around the 25th Infantry Division in the Hobo Woods area, where the ground was level and based on clay. And a lot of those tunnels had been actually dug by the Viet Minh when the French were in country. We saw some pretty sophisticated base camps. They had underground hospitals, but they weren't long range or long winded. It was just an underground operating room that protected them from B-52 arc lights. On Hamburger Hill, the dugouts they made were A-frame shaped, which absorbed the concussion from the bombs that exploded and protected the guys inside. They were less inclined to cave in because they were A-frames as opposed to a flat roof. They weren't fools. The NBA were good soldiers. We had a lot of respect for them. They had some sense of honor among themselves, which the Viet Cong did not have. They weren't prone on torturing prisoners or wounded GIs. Not saying they wouldn't shoot a wounded GI, but they weren't big on torturing like the Viet Cong were. They operated a lot like we do. When we were pulling missions, it wasn't uncommon to hear them talking and banging things and singing and laughing coming down the trail. Just like we would in our rear, they did the same in their rear. Usually if we had a team compromised, it was because they saw us coming in or they heard us coming in and they were out looking for us. Normally we would hear them before they heard us, which made our job a lot easier.
Wow. Let me get back to these questions. We've got a slew of good ones. Joshua Cochran would like to know, can you describe at what pace you guys would patrol and roughly how far you'd go and could move in a day on a good day, assuming everything's working with y'all?
Well, it depended on the mission, the terrain, proximity of the enemy. I was on one patrol. We inserted by ladder in a creek bed and came out the same way on that patrol. We inserted next to an overgrown field that had elephant grass and cane growing up in it, and it was dry. And it took us. We inserted at first light, and at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we got through this field, which was probably about 100 yards across. So I mean, we would move. I don't even want to describe how slowly we moved. It took us a good 10 hours to go 100 yards, mainly because of the noise. And we were out again. There was no LZ around us. If we got compromised in that field, we had to get back to that creek and come out on a ladder. And there was a ridge line across that field from us. That was where we were supposed to go. When we got through that at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there was a dark spot we could see from the far side of the field. We could see the top of it over the cane, and we thought that was an opening in the jungle or the forest. When we got to that dark spot, it was indeed an opening that was probably 9 or 10 feet across and about 15 feet high. In that opening was a spider web that covered that entire opening. And up in the corner was a spider that was as big around as a basketball. I found out later it was an Asian bird spider that would catch birds in its web, and that's what it fed on. Well, there was no way to get past that web into that opening to get up to the ridge top. So we had to work our way farther down the edge of the ridge and go up through the trees to get to the top of that ridge. Nobody wanted to mess with that web. But again, the point I'm bringing is it took us all day to get across that football field with field. And I mean, it sounded like you were rattling mariachi when you're going across there because it was so noisy. So we had to ease our way through that so we wouldn't make a lot of noise. That was atypical. Normally, we would move very slowly, 10 to 15 feet at a time, and stop and listen. If we were in an area where we thought there were enemy, it was always that slow. If we were in an area where the terrain was more open and we were on the side of a ridge, we moved a little bit faster. We didn't stop as often. It depended on how much noise we made moving faster. We always stopped and listened after going 10 yards to, I should say 10 feet. 10 yards is usually how far we would go without stopping. We avoided trails, even though there were times we couldn't, where we had to walk a trail or step over a trail. There was a procedure for doing that, crossing a trail. Depends on if it was a high-speed trail or some trails were animal trails. We felt more comfortable walking on those. If there was fresh footprints on the trail, we would usually back away and try to find a place where we could sit up.
Oh, no. Y'all bear with him. He'll be back in just a sec. Dang it. I do not know what the issue with his connection is. Great questions though, guys. Well, we're definitely going to get into them all. Great questions so far. And Badlands, I just finished the lightning story, reading about it. Oh, he's back.
I don't know what's causing that. Usually we try to set up off a trail about 15, 20 feet, sometimes closer, depending on the cover, and to watch the trail. And we usually watch it for 24 hours. If we didn't have any traffic on it, we'd get up and we'd move again.
Oh, no. Oh, I'm so sorry, guys.
That's doing that.
We're back. It's fine. You can
Okay.
roll on.
But that's usually how we handle trails. My team went in 2 weeks before Hamburger Hill. We didn't know the mountain is Hamburger Hill at the time. It was Dongat Bia to us. And the helicopters put us in the wrong LZ. They actually put us in Laos. And we couldn't find out where we were on the map.
I'm worried that we may have to postpone and do a part 2 until we can figure out what's wrong here, guys.
And keeps kicking us off the site. Anyway, we didn't know where we were, and we finally figured out that we weren't in Vietnam. And we started heading east, and after about 150 yards, I guess, we realized we could orient our map, and we realized we were back where we should have been. So they put us in back behind Hamburger Hill instead of on the front of it. They put us in an old First Cav minefield.
Oh. Oh no. I think he's got weak internet connection, and I think it's doing what it used to do to me, and it would just shut us off right in the middle and send us to the start screen, because he's coming back so quick each time.
The heavy rains had washed a lot of the mud out of there, and the mines were exposed. We could.
All right, guys, we're going to try it a few more times, and I'm not going to do this to y'all to where we keep cutting off. We'll work on it because it's raining bad at his house, and he must have poor connection. He doesn't have whatchamacallit, high speed like I've got. And the weather is bad here in the south. Oh, see, now it's not even bringing him up like it should be. We just lost like 20 people that were watching. We had like 57 or something, and it's back down to 38. I'm sorry, guys. First, it was me yesterday having an outage, and
I don't know.
Here we go.
On StreamYard or one of our.
Yeah, I think you've got a weak connection with the bad weather.
Possible.
We'll give it a few more tries.
If it happens again, let me start from scratch. I'll bring it back up. Okay. Anyway, we started going up the side of the mountain after we got out of that minefield, and it was a very, very steep mountain, almost a 60-degree grade, and it was.
Oh lordy, 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 lordy. Roddy, absolutely good to see you tonight, man. I hope you're doing good. Oh, here he's back.
Yeah, I don't know what's causing that.
It's a weak connection. I know for a fact what it's doing. It's kicking him off each time. We'll see if we can keep it going. I appreciate that, Jason. I'm trying, man.
Let me go off the air and try to start from scratch.
Okay, that's not going to do anything, guys. But we'll let him try and restart it. But it's terrible weather down here. It's been raining since yesterday morning, and it's not been a constant bad weather, but it's literally been raining for 2 days straight, and it's actually pretty bad here. Mr. Gary had sorry, that's a message from a SOG man. Trying to get Doc Padgett's on. I've got to talk to him and see if we can schedule a time. We've got a bunch of new people on. If y'all check the YouTube page to see on live the upcoming guests, we've got a lot of surprising guests. 2 returns that I think y'all are going to be pleased with. 3 returns, actually, for part 2s. We'll give him a few more minutes, guys. I apologize again. I thank y'all for bearing with me. We are, Josh. I promise you, even if it went 100% and we had no issues, I was gonna have him back again because with the books, I've just got while we're here. Well, he's back. We've got so much stuff to talk about. Let's see.
Okay.
Here we go.
Anyway, we climbed about halfway up that mountain, and it got dark on us, and it was so steep we had to tie ourselves to the trees in a straight line, instead of sitting up in a circle. We didn't put any Claymore mines out. And we spent the night like that, trying to sleep. The next morning, we climbed. We were on there was a finger ridge coming off to the east. And we climbed up to the crest of that ridge, and we got up on top, and there was a high-speed trail big enough to drive a car up. And we backed off of it for a few minutes and decided to take a running jump and jump across that trail and set up on the far side of it, just off the military crest of the ridge. We took turns leaping that trail, and which is hard to do with a rucksack, but we did it. And we went off the military crest and set up a circular perimeter just to where we could see heads going up that trail. And there wasn't a lot of ground cover, unfortunately. So that's why we went off the military crest. That night we had, well, actually that day and that night, we had several platoons of NVA come from the floor of the Ashaw Valley up that trail and move on up to the top of the mountain, which was probably about 300 meters above us. Where we were, it was on a finger ridge, and it was fairly level, very gently sloping. That night, they kicked on generators about 9 o'clock at night, and we could see the glow from the lights lighting up on that hillside up there. They had lights strung through the trees, and they kicked on chainsaws, and they were building bunkers with chainsaws. And this went on for 2 nights. We heard this. And it was my team, but I was the ATL on the mission because it was my last patrol. And the guy taking over me was a shake and bake E6, and he wanted to move on up and find out what was going on. Unfortunately, 3 of the guys on that patrol had been team leaders. And we said, well, you go ahead. We're going to stay here. We know what's going on. We don't have to see it. So anyway, he threatened to court-martial all of us when we got back to the rear. I won't mention names, but we were pretty adamant that all of us were sharp. We weren't going to go up to find out what they were doing. That evening, we had aircraft that would fly out and relay our radio relay for us because we couldn't get out. When that plane, before that plane even arrived, those generators kicked off and all the lights went off. So they knew there was a plane coming before we even heard it. Every day in the Ashaw Valley, about 4 o'clock in the evening, 4:15, the storms would roll in out of Laos, and we'd have a thunderstorm that would last about 30 minutes, and then it would stop raining. Well, this particular night, well, I shouldn't say night, particular evening was the last day of our patrol, and we were going to move down to the floor of the valley for an extraction right after the storm blew off. So I think it was Ron Rucker was our radio operator, senior radio operator. The storm rolled in as usual about 4:30. It lasted about 20 minutes, and this night it started hailing on us. So I was sitting on my rucksack to keep my butt dry, and it was hailing like crazy, and it finally stopped. And I told Ron Rucker, I said, call and sit rep in and tell him that as soon as the storm finalizes, we'll head down to the valley for a pickup. When he keyed the handset on his radio, lightning hit the whip antenna and set off all 5 of our Claymore mines, which were all fairly close to us. So we caught the back blast from 5 Claymores. And the rucksack I was sitting on, I had a Willie Peter in one pocket and a concussion grenade in the left pocket. Well, the concussion grenade went off and threw me about 50 feet through the jungle, wrapped me around a big mahogany tree. And we didn't know what happened. You know, when I woke up, my pants were smoking. There was no sound except the little bit of drizzle still. Everything was silent. There was a little bit of rain still falling. And I was alone. There was nobody around me. And Larry Chambers had blown him down the side of the mountain. And Larry came crawling up to me about 10 minutes later. And I had made up my mind I wanted to die out there because I couldn't feel my legs. I thought I lost my legs. And he went for help, and John Sires and Larry came back, and Larry Clausen. They drugged me back into the perimeter, and the explosion had kind of paralyzed most of us, partially paralyzed us. I was paralyzed from the chest down. The only kid that was uninjured was a black kid. It was his first mission. His name was Hillman. And here's these 5 crazy white guys different types of injuries, and none of them were normal. Rucker was standing there screaming and looking at his hand. He had black plastic from the handset embedded in his face, and his hand had black plastic in it, more the handset had blown up. And he didn't know what was going on. Clausen was paralyzed on the left side of his body. His left arm was dragging, and Sires was holding his left arm with his right hand, saying, "Anybody see my arm? I blew my arm off." So nobody was normal. And we had been in the jungle, but the whole area was wide open. There was one tree that was blocking the sky. All the other trees were gone. And it was kind of freaky for us. We didn't know what had happened. We didn't figure it was lightning. We thought the NBA had hit us. The side of the radio had blown out. There was a hole in it, and it was still smoking, so we didn't have any commo. The second radio, which hadn't worked the entire mission, somehow or another, Rucker got that radio working. And he called for a medevac, and we reported we were in contact. And thank God there was a medevac helicopter already over the Ashall Valley, headed out to pick up an infantry guy who had got malaria down on the floor of the valley. And they diverted to us. And pretty soon, right after he called, that helicopter was over the top of us and couldn't lower itself because there was a tree sticking up. Well, Clausen and Sires, between the two of them, were able to push that tree over because it was damaged. It was a sapling about this big around, about the size of a cantaloupe. And they knocked that tree down, and the helicopter could come low enough to drop a body basket down. Well, they put me in the body basket because I was the worst injured, and put Clausen in on top of me. Clausen was the team leader. I gave his name anyway. And they hoisted us up and slid us into the helicopter and slid me up against the back wall, still in the basket, unhooked the basket, and put a jungle penetrator on the end of the winch. And they shoved Larry Clausen up against me, and the back end of Larry's pants had been ripped out. So his ass was right in my face. And there was no thing I could do about it. I couldn't move. They lowered the penetrator and brought two guys up on the penetrator, dropped it back down, and I think Chambers and Hillman were the last two that came up. As they pulled the penetrator into the helicopter, about 15 or 20 NVA ran into our perimeter and opened up on the helicopter. Well, the pilot just did a nosedive down off the side of that ridgeline towards the floor of the valley and climbed out again. I don't know if the helicopter took any hits or not. It sounded like it, but it could have been the door gunner firing too. They got us back to Camp Eagle and triaged us, and four of us were partially paralyzed. I was paralyzed from the chest down. They put me in a hospital room, and 4 days later, I could see my big toe started wiggling. And over the next 24 hours, the feelings came back in the usage, I should say, not the feelings. I ended up with neuropathy from the chest down. I don't feel hot or cold, but I can move my feet again. I had 5 weeks left in country when that happened, and I still had time to go out on another patrol because in our company, you could go out on patrol. You would go out on patrols until you were less than 30 days in country. Then you were on stand down. Well, I still had five weeks left, so officially I could have gone on another patrol. I was not going to take an R&R because I'd saved my money. I was getting married 2 weeks after I got home. So I decided at the last minute, I'm not going to go out on any more patrols. I'm going on R&R. And I applied for R&R to Australia and got bumped by a second lieutenant that had 4 months in country. So I took what was left. I went to Hawaii for R&R. And when I came back, I stayed down south AWOL until I had 28 days left in Vietnam. I mean, I was mentally done. That was my last patrol. I'd had a premonition 2 months earlier that I was going to die in the Ashall Valley. And when I got that word to go on that patrol, I thought my premonition was coming true. And I didn't want to get killed that late in Vietnam with a wedding 6 weeks away. So I turned chicken, I might say. Nothing was going to make me go out again. It was my 28th patrols. I had close calls on 7 different patrols, and it actually written myself off 3 different times in Vietnam where I accepted the fact I wasn't coming back to the patrol. That mission, the lightning hit us April 23rd, 1969. And every April 23rd, I get a phone call from Ron Rucker, who lives in Louisiana. And if it's storming up here or down there, I don't answer the phone. He's the guy that brought the lightning in on us. He comes up deer hunts with me once in a while. We're still best of friends, but he and I don't share thunderstorms together.
I can see why. Good old Mother Rucker. And guys,
we call him Mother, or Mom is what we call him in Vietnam. We still call him that.
And again, guys, I showed 2 other books, and they mention overall history more so than Mr. Gary's personal history. And if you're interested in Mr. Gary's personal tours and his history in Vietnam, Eyes of the Eagle, F Company Lurks in Vietnam, 1968, wonderful book. And Eyes Behind the Lines, L Company Rangers in Vietnam of 1969. And as a matter of fact, what he just spoke about, that's pretty much how the book ends. And there's actually some more hairy stuff that goes in. And for him to, I didn't want to interrupt, but for him to say he chickened out, he did not. For someone who was short, you went through a heck of a whole lot of stuff there your last 5 weeks of being in country.
I think my big problem was I had gone with this young lady we went together for 5 years, and she wanted to get married before I went overseas, and I put her off in case something happened to me. And making it through the tour I went through, and her planning a big wedding 2 weeks after I got home, the last thing in the world started bothering me. I started feeling guilty, and every time I went on a patrol, and after that last mission, I couldn't do it to her anymore.
And it's understandable. And guys, you need to read those books. I mean, I didn't know much about the Rangers, and I'm getting a very quick education on these books. And I'll be reading these other books that we've been speaking about, and even the ones by Mr. Ken and Mr. Ray. But speaking of that mission of being inserted in the wrong place and getting pre-mission intelligence, our next question by Jason Holmes. He's curious about, with a team leader and assistant team leader, how much did you know about the target areas that you guys were going to be inserting it in, or your tactical area of operation once inserted?
Yeah, we knew quite a bit. Very seldom did we go in the same AO. It was always usually a different AO. But we had intel reports come in during our pre-mission briefing. They briefed the entire team. Usually somebody from division, our brigade, came down and briefed us. And it was a briefing showing the layout of the AO. Normally it was 7 or 8 square clicks, or 1,000 meters, 7 or 8 of those. Could be in any kind of configuration, a box or a straight line. It just depended on the terrain and what they knew was in there or suspected was in there. Then we would do an overflight. The assistant team leader and the team leader would go on an overflight in a Huey. Usually it was high altitude, but that's why God made binoculars. We'd fly over the AO or off to the side of it and try to locate, get an idea of how it laid out, the terrain features, clearings for landing zones and pickup zones, where the streams were, where we would suspect a trail would be if a trail's in there. So we had a pretty good idea of how that looked. When we got back to we had a team meeting, and we would go over the maps, and if it was real steep, that was probably not worth. The enemy didn't set up on steep terrain. They usually sat up close to water, where it was more level or gently sloping. So we would orient our mission based on the contour map to that. We pretty well follow that patrol route on a patrol. We would deviate if we had to, if something led us to deviate, but we would follow that patrol route pretty closely. We would check in usually 2 or 3 times a day, unless we found something. Then it was more often. We'd check in twice during the night. If we missed the first sit rep and missed the second one, the first one, they would try to reach us if we didn't reach them on time. If we missed the second one, they'd send out a helicopter to fly over the LZ and try to reach us by radio. If we missed that one, they'd put a reaction force on the ground and try to find out what happened to us. So there was procedures and policies that we always followed for safety purposes. If we were beyond commo with our rear area, we'd put a radio relay team on the nearest fire base or an adjoining mountaintop, and those guys would sit there and relay that was their only mission, was to handle relays from us. Our biggest problem in Vietnam in I Corps was commo. We always had commo problems. If you got on the backside of a ridge or the backside of a mountain, you couldn't even get out to your radio relay team. So we always had to keep in mind that wherever we set up for the night, we had to be somewhere where we could get commo. It was really dangerous going without it. I mean, reaction forces, air support, extractions, all depended on commo. If you lost commo, you were in trouble.
And those were those special, I believe they were called X-ray teams, were the teams that
the radio relay teams. Yeah, they were X-ray teams, and it was usually 3 or 4 guys, up to 6 guys from our unit. Commo people from our unit. That's what they did. They pulled radio relay missions. I'd say about half the missions we used radio relay.
And some of the guys, we won't give it away because, in my opinion, that's one of the more heavier parts of the book. Some of y'all's one of your X-ray teams get into a heavy predicament when one of the fire support bases y'all are doing scout workout comes under fire. If you will.
Base Jack, yeah. Well, the team that we lost was a radio relay team.
Oh,
they had transferred into us from the 4th Infantry Division when the 4th went back to the States, and they wanted to stay together. So they went out on a radio relay team up by the DMZ, and they spent 4 days without moving. Radio relay teams are supposed to move. You're not staying in the same spot. These guys stayed in the same spot. They didn't answer 2 calls. They sent a reaction force in, and they found out they had fallen asleep at night. And there were 2 piles of AK-47 brass. 2 NVA had walked in and executed all 6 of them.
God.
I mean, they messed up. It shouldn't have happened, but the NVA had tracking devices. If you stayed in the same spot, they could pinpoint your location from radio relay, radio communication, and that's what they did. They spent 4 nights without moving.
God Almighty, that is a very costly mistake. That's just terrible.
Well, the worst part is they left 4 teams without combo when they got wiped out. There were 4 teams out in the field around them.
God. And y'all, y'all went several times without commo, and it's very hairy, like you said, because everything relies on your radio. That's your lifeline out.
That's true. I mean, you really feel alone when the radios aren't working. And we always carried extra batteries because when the batteries got weak, that affected your commo too. So usually we had between the 6 of us, we had 4 extra batteries with us on a 7-day mission.
Man, oh man! And when we were speaking of getting overflights, Jason was also curious. Y'all used helicopters at any point in time. Did y'all have FACs or bird dog pilots doing?
Yeah, we had FACs, OV-10s. Yeah, we usually when you were calling in an airstrike, usually that's who came out to handle that for us. And at times they also did that with artillery. Our company commander came out in a Loach several times and adjusted airstrikes for us too.
Wow. And y'all have some very interesting encounters with some of the Loach helicopters. His book is full of some outstanding stuff. Robert was curious, during your time in Vietnam, did you have any of your compatriots go to run with SOG at all, or anyone ever end up with SOG and come back, or did they end up with SOG at all? He was curious.
My first team leader, Ray Zojak, he was a Philly boy, Philadelphia, hell of a team leader. He and Miller were going to go to SOG right after I left. And the problem with Miller was he'd already extended twice, and they wouldn't let him extend a third time. With Ken not being able to go, Ray decided not to go to SOG. He didn't want to go alone. They had both gone down and talked to CCN at FOB1. We did a lot of our rappelling training at their camp. So, and we traded weapons with them, and we were pretty close to some of the guys in CCN. That's where they were going to go. And they had talked to some of the guys about the teams, and it was a time when CCN was losing a lot of people in '69. Mm-hmm. So that, if I wouldn't have gotten married when I got home, if I didn't have anybody waiting for me, I probably would have extended myself for the LRPs, or the Rangers at the time. It's a bad feeling when you leave those guys behind. I mean, we were brothers, even guys from other teams, we were closer than line doggies are to each other. When you serve on a team and you put your life in the same people's hands all the time, and they trust you and you trust them, it's a really close brotherhood. Even today, we were the first Vietnam company that had a reunion after Vietnam. In 1984, one of our clerks, one of our truck drivers, called me and said, "Would you help me round up the guys to have a reunion?" We spent 2 years, and of the 600 guys that served in our unit, I think 78 had died in Nam. Of the 600 guys, we found 248. And we had a reunion, and 189 guys showed up for that reunion, including about 20 guys from other LRP Ranger companies that heard we were having a reunion. From that reunion, my company started the 75th Ranger Regiment Association. So, I mean, that's where all this started. Since then, we've branched off and formed the Long Range Reconnaissance Association because the 75th Ranger Association wouldn't allow the modern day long range surveillance unit guys to join the association because they weren't considered Rangers. So we started a unit that did accept them. So the Long Range Patrol Association, we have LRS and LRS-D and LRS-SU in that association with us. So I belong to the 75th Ranger Association and also the Long Range Reconnaissance Association.
Wow.
Matter of fact, we have a rally every year in Branson in June where we have 200 to 300 guys show up. It's all the LRPs from the Vietnam era and the post-Vietnam era.
Oh, wow. I can only imagine what that's like. Y'all getting to see each other and new people showing up that maybe not hasn't been in the past, and finally getting to see y'all after all these years.
Well, we've had guys showing up that one guy, Jim Thayer, who I helped write a book. He was the 9th Infantry Division LRP. He saved a guy. They got ambushed, and he grabbed a guy that got their point man got shot across the legs. Jim grabbed him and carried him out over his shoulder while firing at the ambush, and saved this guy's life. At our first long range surveillance or long range reconnaissance association reunion, that guy showed up and met Jim at the reunion. I mean, Jim had said he brought his whole family with him. That reunion we have in Branson, we booked 3 entire hotels, and 2 of the hotels are owned by the same people. There's a big park between them. We put up 2 big 40 by 80 foot tents in that park. We have both those hotels with our people in it, plus another hotel. And we spend a week-long, it's a week-long event all in that park area. We don't leave to go, we may go out to eat or something, but we have food catered in. We have a barbecue. We have a pizza night, and with 200 to 300 guys and their wives and families. It's a neat event.
That sounds outstanding. I bet y'all, not only y'all, but the families. That sounds like that's a wonderful time.
It is. You know, the Vietnam vets are dying out. There's fewer and fewer of us every year. But most of the young guys, they got into the LRRPs units because they read the books. So they come to these reunions wanting to meet these guys they read about, and we're all like family. You know, we're honored that these guys carry on our legacy and did a masterful job at it. They've done things we weren't trained to do, and it's just a big family.
That's kind of a good lead in to our next question about legends and people that stand out in the community. Jason, we know about SOG legends, Jerry Shriver, Billy Waugh, Dick Meadows, etc. Can you talk about or share some names of men who helped shape the transition of the LRRPs to Rangers, or just outstanding LRRPs and outstanding Rangers that may have not gone over to be Rangers?
Well, very few of them went over to be LRRPs and Rangers. Most of those guys volunteered in Vietnam. The 100 F Company 58th Infantry from the 101st, there was 101st had a recondo school at Fort Campbell. And the last two graduating classes of the recondo school and their instructors formed F Company 58th Infantry LRRPs, my unit, and they came over as a LRRP unit. The instructors were the cadre, and the graduates of the last two classes were the men on the teams. Well, they came over with no experience and set up that F Company 58. Now, the experienced guys were with the 1st Brigade LRRPs that had already been in country, and some of those guys volunteered to come to F58. Well, there was immediate rivalry between the guys with in-country experience and the guys that had trained at recondo school at Fort Campbell, and that didn't work out well. You know, the guys that were there already in 1st Brigade LRRPs, they got mistreated because they weren't the team leaders. And since they had experience, they said, well, we're not going to take this crap. So they went on and went to line companies or helicopter door gunners to get out of that company. And then F Company had to learn, basically by trial and error, how to become LRRPs in Vietnam. I was a replacement in that company. I didn't go over with the division. The division got there in November of 67. I joined them in June of 68. So when I got wounded in November of 68, and I came back from the hospital a month later, all those old guys that came over with the division were gone. For me, it was like coming back to a new unit. Ken Miller was there because he extended. So, I mean, but Larry Chambers was there, but Larry was a replacement like I was. Ron Rucker was another guy. He joined the company after I did. He had gone on extension leave and came back. He wasn't in Nam when I got hit, but he was there when I got out of the hospital. So when I came out of the hospital, I went from being a 6-month guy to being one of the old guys. That's why I ended up taking a team in March of 69. All the old guys were gone.
And that's another, wild few months there or a few weeks. I mean, it's a pretty short time there. You're in the hospital. You have quite the interesting hospital stay. Not that you're injured, but not that you're going through something terrible in that sense. But y'all have quite the experience. We'll just say that at the hospital. That turns
I almost got killed by South Koreans in a riot.
That at a was it the USO show, correct?
Yeah, it was a Filipino USO show.
Oh man,
I'm not going to tell the story, but we had a riot between about 200 South Koreans, none of whom were wounded. They were all there with arthritis and from the weather, and 200 Americans who most of them were wounded.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can definitely read about it in his books. It's God, that is that's one for the books for a hospital stay.
I thought so too.
As a matter of fact, you fight to get the heck out of there. It's so bad.
I lied to get out of there. As a matter of fact, I went and stayed with a friend from my hometown who convinced the doctor that I was his stepbrother that he hadn't seen in 2 years. He was in the Air Force at the Air Force Base, and got me to go stay at the Air Force Base for a couple of days. And I ended up telling that doctor I want to go back to my unit, even though I was still officially on profile, because I almost got killed down there. And I said, I want to spend Christmas with my guys.
God Almighty, that's a great part. That's God, that was so wild. Josh was wondering, could you speak a little bit about what it was like rappelling for an insertion method into a mission?
Yeah, we practiced rappelling at FOB1 at Fubai,
Wow.
which was a CCN base. They had a rappelling tire, and we learned to rappel down a wall, and we also learned to free rappel off a platform, which was similar to rappelling out of a helicopter. I was quite good at it. I picked it up real quickly, and when I rappelled, I just about free roped down to about 10, 12 feet off the ground, and I'd slowly break myself to where I could almost land right on the ground. So a lot of guys came down in steps. I didn't do that. I enjoyed it. I did some rappelling after I got out of the service because I enjoyed it so much. Rappelling down a wall or off a platform is different than rappelling out of a helicopter because there's no wall to bounce off of coming down, and you're basically on a rope, and you're coming down that rope at whatever speed you want. I did it quickly because I realized you're a pretty good target coming down that rope if you stop about every 10 feet or come down slowly. So I came down that rope about as fast as it would allow me until I got close to the ground. We practiced that quite a bit. We did the rappelling out of a helicopter in training, and I actually went on one patrol where I had to rappel on a foggy jungle where we couldn't even see the ground. All you could see was the tops of the trees, and I described it as when we flew over it, it looked like broccoli heads sticking up out of mashed potatoes is what it looked like. My team and another team both rappelled in what was supposed to be the same landing zone, and we ended up being about 150, 200 yards apart when we went in. The two teams did. It was on a hillside, gently sloping, and I landed in the middle of a high-speed trail with a freshly poured concrete bunker right behind me. And I mean, when I was the first out of the helicopter because I was the team leader on that mission, and when I hit, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something didn't seem right. And I didn't know there was a trail there until I landed. And then when my weapon was slung over my back, and I turned around, here's this freshly poured concrete bunker with no foliage on it, right behind me. And then my radio operator came down behind me on the same rope, ended up you got his radio handset cord tangled in the rope, and he stops about 10 feet off the ground. He can't come any farther, which was a mess. I had to get the helicopter to come lower, almost into the trees, so I could cut the rope off above him. And then the next guy that came out on that rope had to pre-fall about 15 feet when he got to the end of the rope. We rappelled out two ropes, one on each side of the helicopter, 3 guys on each rope. That was the only time I actually did it on a mission. I inserted a couple of times by rope ladder and came out 2 or 3 times by rope ladder. That was rough at the end of a patrol with a heavy rucksack climbing that rope ladder. The end guy was the one that would hold that rope ladder down while the other guys climbed, and then it was flailing when he came up. A lot of times the last guy would de-ring himself onto the ladder and ride that ladder back to Camp Eagle because it was very hard to climb it with nobody holding the end of it down.
I can't imagine how tired, and especially in your books, you go into such detail explaining, just what it took to keep going on these long missions, and then your only way out of there is to hang on, clip in, and pray to the gods that you're strong enough and the pilot's good enough to get you out of the trees, and you hang on to get back home.
Well, you're sitting on one of the rungs when that happens and holding on the ladder, but the D-ring was a safety precaution. And I'd hate to think that D-ring was all that was holding me on that ladder, but it was the same kind of ride as coming back on strings. So you get used to that.
That's got to be the wildest. Roller coasters must not do anything for y'all these days after coming out on strings?
I never messed with it. There's no ride like this or jumping out of a plane. The bad thing about strings, when 3 guys came out on separate strings, you had to hold on to each other.
Mm.
And the main reason, there's a pendulum effect. If you let go of each other, you got guys swinging in different directions, and it'll flip a helicopter. You know, I mean, then the other thing is the pilot's got to know what he's doing. If he takes off too fast and you're dragging back behind the helicopter and he slows up, you swing forward. You know, the pilot's got to know how to handle guys on strings too. That's why we used to practice that quite a bit.
Wow.
And if they were taking fire, a lot of times they'd start flying forward to get away from the gunfire and drag you through the trees before they cleared the trees. So there was a lot of things that could go wrong on that.
Was the cav mostly y'all's mode of insert and extract, or who was the air?
Bravo Company, 101st Aviation, the Kingsmen, they did more flying for F-58 than anybody. When we became Rangers, we were attached to the 2nd of the 17th Cav, A Troop, B Troop, C Troop, and D Troop. Well, one of their troops was a gunship troop, and one of them was a slick troop. And then their reaction force was their D Troop. Well, we worked with them, and their pilots flew us also, besides the Kingsmen. Nothing against the Cav pilots, but we practiced more with the Kingsmen pilots, and they actually did a better job than the Cav pilots because we practiced with them more. And the Kingsmen were the ones that they told us, if we put you in, we're going to come and get you out no matter what. And they did. They were great pilots.
Man, and some of those guys, y'all get into some hairy situations, and or you're about to be in some hairy situations, and thank God that they come back for y'all, and because there are a few hair-raising stories. Most of your missions are pretty hair-raising, but there's a few in there that had y'all not linked up with air when y'all did, and they got in when they did. You might not be sitting here sharing history with us tonight.
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, there were 3 different times we wouldn't have made it out of there if it wasn't for those guys. On the November 20th mission, when we were surrounded, we didn't have any helicopter support because our helicopters had been confiscated by a battalion commander for a battalion combat assault. So they'd taken our birds from us. Well, these 2 pilots were coming back from that combat assault and heard what was going on the radio and broke formation and flew back to our company and radioed ahead of time to have guys on the chopper pad. They were taking them out to us to get us out. They actually broke rules, broke regulations, and flew our guys out. 23 guys on the reaction force, 13 on one helicopter, 10 on the other. Both helicopters were overloaded. That's how we got out of there.
And that's one of the hairy ones. You can read about that. That's God, that gives me goosebumps.
11 Silver Stars and 2 Distinguished Service Crosses given on that mission.
Man, it's you guys. I mean, y'all. Guys, y'all have got to. That's one of the highlights of the books, especially Mr. Gary's personal story. That's for sure. Absolutely unforgettable. Mr. Walkabout and Mr. Gary and the guys up there. It's unbelievable. Pete was curious about your gear and a loadout. What were you going to carry if you were told to get ready for a 7-day mission?
So a 7-day mission, our rucksacks weighed 125 pounds. That was not considering the web gear. Web gear was 40 pounds. So we were humping 165 pounds, climbing mountains on a 7-day mission. And we usually carried a 2-gallon collapsible water bladder in the back of our rucks, besides 4 canteens. And a lot of us humped extra grenades and ammo on long missions like that. On a 3-day mission, rucksack would weigh like 80 pounds, and again, 40 pounds for the web gear. So 80 pounds was more normal. But there were times, I mean, we actually, you couldn't get off the ground with somebody had to pull you up with 125 pound ruck.
I mean, I don't understand how y'all can be covering the ground and especially the terrain with that amount of weight. I mean, that is unbelievable.
Well, keep in mind, we didn't run with those rucksacks. If we had the E&E, we dropped the rucksacks and put a thermite grenade on them, or a Willie Peter.
God.
So, I mean, and again, we didn't move fast. We took our time moving, and you'd stop every 10 or 15 yards and listen for a while, which gave you a break. If we had to climb up the side of a mountain without stopping numerous times, we'd never made it.
Mm, mm, mm. And while you're out there, so I just saw that question come in, but what are you doing for insects, and or in case y'all come across snakes? Do y'all have mosquito repellent? Do y'all have anything like that to keep off y'all?
We didn't always use insect repellent because of the smell.
Mm,
We used it initially when we put our camo paint on before the mission. If you mix that paint with insect repellent, it went on better. I mean, there were guys that would, everybody had a different way of applying it. If you applied it dry, it didn't stay on long. You know, it would cake. If you put insect repellent with it, it went on more like a paste, and it would last longer. So most of us originally applied it with the insect repellent. We didn't like using it out in the field because of the smell of the insect repellent. We took pills that kept us from crapping for 5 days. I mean, I don't remember what the medical term was, but you didn't have a bowel movement, you know, unless you had the runs. And if you had the runs, usually you pulled out of, you got on the patrol if you had the runs. We took malaria pills on missions. We took Darvon to stay awake at night. The big no-no on a LRP team was if you snored, you didn't stay in the LRPs very long. And that was hard to do, sleeping on your back. Most of the time we'd sleep on our backs against our rucksacks with the rucksacks on us. So with those arms and sleeves. And our web gear, which we would unhook, but we had our web gear on too. That's how you slept. Most of the guys slept with a poncho liner, not a poncho. Ponchos were too noisy, especially when it rained. You could hear the rain beating off a poncho. So we took poncho liners with us. Amazing how safe you felt under a poncho liner. You pull it up over your head at night, keep the insects off, and it was like being in a safe house with that poncho liner over you. I thought it was just me, but a lot of guys said, yeah, I felt the same way. We would usually sleep in a circle with claymores out around us, fairly close to us. There were a couple of missions where we tied strings to our little fingers and tied it to the guy next to us so we could move our finger and wake him up for guard duty. And it was kite string, so it was easy to break. But rather than rolling over and waking a guy up, it was easier to pull on his finger. And that was only on some hairy missions where we were close to a fire base or an enemy base camp. Normally, different teams did it different ways. When I was a team leader, I would put guys on guard duty for 45 minutes, and they'd pull 2 shifts at night. And it was easier to stay awake for 45 minutes than it was for an hour and a half, which a lot of team leaders made you pull 1 hour and a half shift per night. Too damn easy to get sleepy and fall asleep on an hour and a half guard duty. So again, there were a couple of us that we had guys pulling for 45 minutes at a time, and that wasn't too bad. Anybody could stay awake for 45 minutes. If we had movement around us or we were close to an enemy base camp, we would put 2 guys on guard duty at a time. One third awake, 2/3 sleeping. When we ate, it would be 2 guys eating, 4 guys pulling security. We buried our trash. We ate LRP rations. Sometimes a guy would bring a can of peaches or something, mainly for the liquid in it. Peaches and pound cake we would kill for. You know, we didn't get C rations very often, but when guys got a box of C rations and they got peaches out of one box, they'd save those peaches until they got pound cake to eat with it. Because that was manna from heaven when you got that combination. C rations were actually good. They were better than C rations. LRP rations were good. We'd take 2 per day. They had quite a variety of rations. The better ones was the chicken and rice and beef and rice and spaghetti, chili con carne. Nobody liked because the beans would never hydrate. The beans were dried no matter what you did to them. We didn't cook in the field, so we ate them cold. The first meal, we would usually put water in it before the patrol, tape it with duct tape under our left arm, and your body heat would be like cooking it. So that meal was the best meal you'd have on a mission. Mixing cold water with it. If you had the time to mix it ahead of time, it wasn't too bad, but usually you poured the water in and ate it. So it didn't have a lot of time to rehydrate. We didn't have the opportunity to mix it ahead of time on patrol. We usually would eat one in the morning and one just before we'd go to our hide site. Oftentimes, we would pick a hide site out and keep walking maybe another 50 meters and go into a fake hide site. And after dark, we'd move back to the original hide site, just in case we were being tailed. A lot of us carried a little bag of pepper, black pepper. If we were being tracked by dogs, we'd put pepper on our back trail, which would ruin a dog's nose for a couple of days. Some guys from other units told me they would pop a CS grenade. I never did that. Never heard of that. But some guys said they did that. If they had a dog on their trail. Pepper worked better because they'd get a nose full of that. There was no warning when they sniffed it; it was in their nose. A lot of guys, some guys would put a contraceptive over the end of their barrel on their weapon to keep rain out. I think I did that one time, not often. My first team leader told me, he said, it's better to need and to have not than to have and to need not than to need and to have not. I took that as gospel. I always carried buku ammo with me when I went out. A lot of guys did. You got to be pretty confident in yourself to go out with a basic load of 12 magazines.
Oh.
To me, that just that didn't last long in a firefight. I also learned that firing on full automatic, you only did that when you broke contact, or to get fire suppression. In a firefight, only a fool fired on full automatic. I recall 2 times in Vietnam where I put it on rock and roll. After that, it was always single shots or triple shots. You didn't burn up a mag that fast. We never had access to the 30-round mags, so we usually carried a 20-round mag with 18 rounds in it. Usually the rounds in my weapon was every 5th round was a tracer. My other loadouts, I did not use tracers. Tracers leave a back trail. You find that out in the firefight. You want to draw fire, put tracers in your magazine. I liked frags. The only problem is when you're in thick jungle, you got to be careful throwing frags because they come back on you sometimes. You hit a tree or something, and you got it right back in your lap. So you got to be careful throwing frags. But frags are a good weapon to use in a close firefight. I carried a 45 on a lot of missions, which I captured from an NBA officer on that November 20th mission. I probably couldn't have hit anything with it because it rattles so bad. It was probably left over from World War II, but I felt better with a pistol, and we didn't issue pistols. There were missions that some of our guys carried shotguns on. Bad thing about a shotgun, you can't carry a whole lot of ammo. Riley Cox, we called him Dozer. Riley carried 40 rounds of ammo and carried a Ithaca pump gun. He had it with him on that mission on November 20th and fired all 40 rounds, half of them with his left arm broken. Or excuse me, his right arm broken. We had accessibility to Sten guns in the company with silencers on them. One mission I carried a Sten gun. We had grease guns, but the problem with the grease guns, I think there was only 4 magazines for them in the entire company. So if you took one out and you had 4 magazines, then you had to load them by hand out in the field. So they weren't real popular. It took 45 caliber ammo. We had a Swedish K in the company for a while with a silencer on it, but it was hard to get 9mm ammo over there. Some guys carried M79s cut down as a backup weapon. Nobody carried that as a primary. Since most of us carried radio batteries, it prevented us from carrying extra sidearms or ammo for other guns or a 79 because that radio battery was heavy enough by itself. And it was usually at the bottom of your rucksack. So, we all carried a Claymore. Some of us carried white phosphorus, or not white phosphorus, plastic explosives, a det card, in case we found a cave or something, I had to blow something up. So there was a lot of stuff in your loadout that was weighty. And when you packed your rucksack so the stuff you might need quickly was on top. Which means if you wanted to dig through something, some guys would bring a jungle sweater to put on at night, and that was usually stuck down at the bottom of your rucksack. The poncho liner, we usually put it against the back part of our rucksack, so it was against your back. Some of the guys wore a rucksack strapped to a shortened frame, which they said was easier walking with a frame, easier to get on also. We cut the frame down on the issued frame because it would ride on your buttocks when you were humping hills, and it would rub a bare spot. So everybody that carried a rucksack frame would cut it down about 4 to 6 inches and glue it back together again. On some patrols, that patrol you read about where we went out after the downed Cobra that we repelled in, we didn't even have rucksacks or maps or anything with no food. That was supposed to be an in and out, and it turned out to be a 7-day patrol before they could get us out of there. That was a rough patrol. A line company finally linked up to us, and they shared some of their sea rations with us and gave us some water, but we still didn't have any blankets or maps or canteens. That was a bad mission. We had a lot of problem with senior officers not knowing how to use us. And most of the deaths you read about when you read the Six Silent Men series and the Phantom Warrior series were caused because some officer misused a LRP team. And I'm not putting anything down on officers, but they thought they knew how to use us. But, you got to know when to get a team out, when to tell them to continue mission. In our company, the guy on the ground had the right to decide when to be extracted or not. And some senior officers didn't abide in that.
That's much like SOG. They and Project Delta before them, guys that on the ground, the 1-0, the team leader, whatever you'd like to call them, whichever group you're in, calling and saying, we need to get out. It's hot. And someone who's never been in the field, much less probably fired a rifle in anger, is saying, no, continue, break contact and continue mission. And
nobody knows except the guy on the ground what they're facing. And I know there were some teams that would fake an extract or fake a contact or something to get out early because of the weather or something, or they had a bad feeling. I know that happened, but it still should be that guy's call.
There's been several times that, and I know for a fact, one gentleman that I've been trying to get on, that he called for an extract. He even declared a prairie fire emergency, and he almost got court-martialed because he threatened the launch officer at the site, saying, if you don't get someone in here to get me and my men out, if I do make it back, I'll be speaking to you in no certain terms with a pistol in my hand. So it's insane to me that officers, enlisted men, what have you, can sit back on the radio and tell person in the field under contact, no, continue mission. We're not coming to get you right now.
Well, we had an example of that. We had a division commander, I won't mention names, come up on the air one time when a team leader was trying to be extracted and said, he said, this is law. He said, son, do you know who this is? And it was Ray Zoshak on the other end of the radio. And he said, no, I don't. He said, this is Lone Eagle 1. And Zoshak said, sir, do you know who this is? And the general said, "No, I don't." He said, "Get the fuck off my airways." And that was the
Oh,
end of it. It never went any farther than that.
wow.
Joe Jack was absolutely right. He was in the middle talking to our company commander about distraction, and this 4-star or 3-star general breaks in. So that's how it was handled.
I mean, I can't. That's mentioned in the book, isn't it? When in your part in one of Eyes of the Eagle or in 68 or 69, and that is one heck of a instance where he just all of a sudden breaks in on the net like that, and they're in the middle of an extraction.
Well, that was when he broke in on Captain Eklund.
Oh, that's right. And Captain Eklund was in
November
the Pelican.
20th. Yeah.
That
was a different general. There was still a commanding general of division. And Eklund was a little more polite about it, but Eklund was in charge of the operation, and the general broke in, wanted to know what was going on.
Oh my God, that the cluelessness of that is just shocking.
That must be hard to be a general.
Absolutely, those stars are heavy. You know, you got to remember that. Badlands was curious in the Rangers and LRPs. Did y'all use blood expander?
Yeah, we did. We always had a canister of it taped to the top of our H harness in the back, and then we practiced on each other's starting IVs with the same needle. 6 of us. We'd wipe the needle off and pass it to the next guy. As a matter of fact, it keeps me from giving blood today. When they found out that we did that, they said, "Well, you're not a blood donor." Our medics never told us that's a good way to pass on hepatitis.
Yeah, the good old days when y'all were young and dumb,
invulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, there was a good one.
My fiance went to nursing school. I used to let her practice starting IVs on me. I look like a junkie from the bruises.
When I hear of guys doing cross training with the team and those that have a medical background showing how to give one, and then someone who's never done one or anything, or even given a shot more or less, and you're practicing, you know, and I believe SOG Dick Thompson was talking about training his team, and I can't imagine how painful that must be getting trained on like that.
It wasn't so painful. We had 4 medics in the company, 2 of which went out on teams. So and the T&E, every team was supposed to have a medic on it. Well, that didn't happen. So our medics would give us first aid classes, and we had designated guys that carried syrettes, morphine syrettes, and 2 guys on the team carried morphine syrettes. But all of us knew how to start an IV. All of us knew how to use blood expanders, and we'd have classes back in the company area, and that's what we did. The medic would say, "Okay, well, now we're going to practice starting IVs. Team 1, work on each other." You know, and so everybody practiced on each other until we got to where we could do that in a rush, because you had to in combat. And it made you feel. We even had an aid bag we took out on patrol with us. One of the guys carried the aid bag. And we all carried individual dressings, but the aid bag had the pills in it for the malaria pills, the no crap pills. All of that was in the aid bag, and the guy designated to handle that would pass those pills out every day. So I mean, we weren't medics, but we had some medical training.
Speaking on the TO&E about having medics on for every team, why was that? Why were y'all? Why was there such a short of medics in the LRP?
Line companies got them. Line companies went through medics like second lieutenants, and they needed them worse than we did because they were in combat more. So and in our company, you had to volunteer. And I think it was kind of frowned on that medics volunteered to be LRPs by the line doggies. If they volunteered, they couldn't keep them from coming to us, but I think they protected them pretty much, and I don't blame them. Our T&E called for staff sergeants to be team leaders. You know how many staff sergeants I saw as a team leader? 4. Ken Miller was a team leader as a Spec 4.
Wow.
And most of our team leaders were buck sergeants. The guy that took over my team was a staff sergeant, but he got it out of shake and bake school. I mean, he was in the Army 8 months. He was a staff sergeant.
Good Lord.
So, I mean, it was an oddity to see a staff sergeant as a team leader.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing what y'all had to work with and how y'all made it work the way y'all did.
You adjust. I mean, that's all I can say. You learn from the guys that with experience. You live through the experience and you adjust. You know, you pick up the stuff that works and you drop the stuff that doesn't work. I had 22 months time and grade as a E5. I made E5 in 17 months, and I had 2 years of ROTC before I went into service. I had 2 years of college. Well, they offered me E6 if I'd re-enlist. You know, and I should have been an E6. I had enough time and grade as an E5, but they saved it until I was being discharged. They offered it to me then if I'd re-enlist. I got out of the military with 40% disability. I was on a profile after I got hit by lightning. It injured my back, and they sent me to the 82nd after Vietnam, but I was off jump status. I couldn't jump anymore. And I called Washington, D.C. when I was home on leave and got my arteries changed because I didn't want to go to the 82nd as a leg. But, you know, I enjoyed the jumping. You know, I enjoyed the extra pay. But there was no point staying in the military with a 40% permanent profile.
Yeah, that would be mighty limiting in what you were able to do. Khalil was curious, and I'm actually pretty curious now after finishing your 2 personal books. What was, in your opinion, the most vital, important piece of enemy intel that you were able to capture? Either weapons, document, treasure, anything. What do you think was the most important?
Most of the intel we collected was trails that the enemy were using, what enemy unit was using them, and where their base camps were. That was the primary stuff. November 20th, that mission that heavy team got hit on, they heard that the 5th NVA regiment had come from Laos into Vietnam. That was the regiment that hit Way during the 68th Tet. And they were back in Vietnam. Well, they wanted proof that they were in the Rung Rung Valley. That ambush we blew and killed those 9 NVA, one of them was the major executive officer for the 5th NVA regiment, and he was carrying a bag full of maps and documents. So when the reaction force came in and got our wounded out and our dead out, they got that bag out that we had pulled off the bodies that we stripped on the ambush. I never heard what the intel was, but when we stripped the bodies and saw what was in that bag, that 45 I captured he was wearing in a holster. And that map bag and all that stuff, that was sent back to division, and I was in the hospital for 30 days. So I don't know what became of that. They wouldn't tell us anyway, but I'm assuming it was pretty valuable. It verified that the 5th NVA regiment was in the Rung Rung Valley. And we killed this NVA major.
Yeah, that's a coup right there. That's a heck of a find.
And we also killed 4 female NVA nurses in that ambush too, which bothered me at the time because my Claymore killed 3 of them, and they were all females. And when we stripped the bodies, and 3 of them had pistols in their rucksacks, American pistols. Well, that made it easier to swallow.
I was about to say they were armed and would have killed you, and they had to get those pistols from somewhere because
none of them were carrying water, so we assumed that there was a base camp pretty close by, and they were going from one side to another that wasn't very far away.
I've not seen it pop up, but it might very well. But did y'all come across any foreigners by chance? Any Chinese? Any Russian? Any?
The first NVA I shot him along with my team leader who was walking point on the mission. Was 6 foot tall, flat top, black hair, stocky, well built, well dressed. Khaki uniform with a red bandana and a khaki boonie cap. I never saw another Vietnamese that looked like that. I mean, I remember thinking at the time, boy, Vietnamese are that big? I mean, this guy was as big as I was. And we shot him, both of us ripped him with a full magazine across the chest, and he staggered backwards and went around a bend in the trail, and we heard him fall. And he was the point element for larger group. But when we did the debriefing, my team leader said that guy was no Vietnamese, and that was my first mission, so I kind of kept my mouth shut. And then my team leader said, "What did you think?" I said, pretty big Vietnamese." So at the debriefing, they pretty well came to the conclusion he was a Chi-Com advisor.
Wow,
That's the only one I saw. I never saw a Russian or a Caucasian. And all the others just seemed like normal Vietnamese. This guy was big.
Man, that it's always strange what y'all would come across out there, personnel and structures. And that's actually our next question is Galil was wondering, did y'all come across any ancient Vietnamese structures, temples, Buddhist shrines, or
not in the Ashall Valley or the Rung Rung Valley? I mean, keep in mind in '65, all of the Vietnamese mountain yards that were living in the valley, they were all relocated out. So were the settlers. They were all relocated out to the coast around Hue. So that was a free fire zone in the Ashall and Rung Rung valleys. If you saw anybody, they were the enemy. Outside of Camp Eagle was set up as a division base camp for the 101st off Highway 1 between the city of Hue and the town of Phu Bai. The city of Hue and Phu Bai were about 10, 12 miles apart. Camp Eagle was in between the two of them in a little bit back towards the mountains. It was set up in a cemetery. There were graves everywhere, big Vietnamese concrete graves, which we used to hide a team when we were pulling ambushes outside the perimeter. They were ideal for 6 guys to get in. They were like 2 half moons with an opening on each end with a gravestone in the center, and they were big enough you could put 6 guys in there, and they were concrete. So it was a good place to set up an ambush. And I mean, Camp Eagle and the surrounding area was nothing but a cemetery for the city of Hue. Some of the training missions we pulled outside the perimeter, and some of those were live missions where we made contact. There were old pagodas and things. I call it Piedmont terrain. It was gently rolling hills that tapered off to the coast, and then about 8 miles to the west, the mountains, the Annamite Cardia started. Okay, so that's the terrain that Camp Eagle was in. We pulled a lot of if we were on a stand down, they might send our team out to set up an ambush outside the perimeter at night. And we would set up in those graves. A couple of times we ended up making contact where one time the perimeter was hit right in front of us. And we got 50 calibers firing tracers over the top of the hill we were on, a bare hill with no cover. We had to get on the back side. And they had fireflies, loaches with miniguns, flying around shooting up the invaders, and they were flushing back towards us, and the gunships were fired at them. So I mean, it can be quite dangerous pulling those kind of patrols. But yeah, there was old pagodas and stuff, big impressive tombs for emperors and things out there that you'd run across. It was fairly safe in the daytime, but at nighttime it was a different animal out there.
Something went wrong. Please try again.
Excuse me, turn my phone off.
It's fine. Speaking of that, because that was one of the questions, and I ended up missing it. It's way up the ways. Did you well, two parts. Personally, did you come across any besides that huge spider? Did you come across any lions, tigers, anything of the sort, or did anybody in the company ever see tigers or anything up close? Big snakes.
One of our teams killed a tiger on the way back from a mission out of a helicopter. They saw it out in the open terrain at Piedmont country and got the door gunner or the helicopter pilot to fly over the top of it. The door gunners and the crew the lrrps opened up on it and killed it. And supposedly one of the helicopter pilots had a friend that was in the Air Force, and he skimmed it out and had it sent back to the States. So I don't know. I'm not saying anything more about that. I was on a mission in August of. I didn't write about this in my book, and you'll understand why in a minute. In August of '68, I think it was my 3rd patrol, and we went in right across the Perfume River from the Piedmont area, right at the base of the mountains. And we went into an area with a bamboo thicket, and then the mountains started on the other side of the bamboo thicket. We climbed this steep mountain looking for a base camp on the backside of the mountain. And the first evening we got about 3/4 of the way up that side of that cliff. And we were strung out in a line. It was steep. And we set up one claymore mine pointing uphill. And right behind us was it was like a hedgerow that was probably 70 feet long, very thick, but very dense, but not very thick. And it was probably 6 to 8 foot high. Well, we sat up against that. And we tied ourselves to some trees and slept in a line because it was steep. And we put one claymore out. I don't think it was behind us. I think it was pointing same parallel we were on, not downhill either. It was too steep to point it downhill. And that's the only claymore we put out that night. It was getting dark, and we didn't take the time to set up a normal perimeter. The next morning, we got up just before daylight, and 2 of the guys were eating their breakfast, a LRP ration, and all of us were sitting in a line facing downhill. And all of a sudden, that hedgerow, which was probably 15 feet behind us, and keep in mind there's big trees all around, starts shaking, and it's like something was trying to get through it. And we all grabbed our weapons and still seated on the ground, turned around to face this hedgerow. All of a sudden, this hedgerow parts, and this creature steps through that I can only describe as, at the time, keep in mind, I didn't know what a Bigfoot was, never heard of one. This creature steps through that was probably 6 to 7 feet tall, had long reddish brown hair, had tremendously long arms. One was holding up the hedgerow where it pushed it open, and the other was hanging at its side. And it stepped through the hedgerow and stopped and looked down at us. Each one of us just kind of looked at us very, very placidly. Didn't look frightened, didn't look angry, just looked at us. Not a one of us lifted our weapons. Not a one of us thought of shooting this thing. And I don't know how long this happened. It was uphill from us a little bit, so it was looking down on us, and we were looking up at it. And I'm guessing this maybe lasted for 15 seconds. And it stepped back through that opening it made, and the brush pushed back together and was gone. We all looked at each other. This was the first full day of a 3-day mission. We all looked at each other like this, and it didn't occur to any of us to shoot this thing. We found an abandoned base camp the second day of the mission on the backside of the ridge. It hadn't been used in a couple of months. We got back to the company, and I was the low man on the team. I was a new guy. And during the debriefing, nobody mentioned this. Nobody. I didn't speak during the debriefing. Nobody asked me anything. That night on the bunker, 2 of the old guys were sitting on the bunker smoking a doobie. And I went out and I was talking to him, and one of the other guys on the team, Tony Tesoro, who shows up on that November 20th mission, walks up and sits down on top of the bunker. And the team leader said, what do you guys think that was? And I said, well, I don't know. I never seen anything like that. And Tony Tesoro said, I think it was an orangutan. And I said, well, I knew a lot about animals, having grown up in the farm and been interested in that stuff. And I said, well, it wasn't bow-legged, and it didn't. Orangutans don't stand erect like that. And there's no orangutans in Vietnam. They're in Borneo and Sumatra. And one of the other guys said, well, maybe it was a rock ape. And I said, I saw a rock ape on my second mission. I said, they look like a dog or a baboon. This was no rock ape. And rock apes don't travel by themselves. So we sat there and we talked about it, and we finally came to the conclusion that it was some kind of baboon. Years later, when I got home, I started researching this because it kind of bothered me. I never told anybody about this. I didn't put it in the book because I thought they'd think I was making up everything in the book. And I came to the conclusion that this had to be some type of Yeti or Sasquatch. And then I started reading about vets in Vietnam, and the North Vietnamese soldiers talked about running into this thing they called a Penang Orang, which is a man of the mountain and mountain yard. And the mountain yards had seen these all over the place. And it wasn't 8 foot tall or 10 foot tall. It was 6 to 7 foot tall. I can't judge it accurately because it was uphill from me, but it was as big as a man was. And it stood straight. I mean, it walked like a man. The legs, I mean, the only place he didn't have hair was on his hands and on his face. Very intelligent looking. Had a little bit of a nose, but it was more flat. And it never acted like it was afraid of us or hostile at all. Never acted that way. And I remember the length of his arms. The arms went almost to its knees. The arm that was hanging down, I remember how long that arm was. And it when it stepped back, it looked like it just checked us out and stepped back through the brush and was gone. We didn't even hear it walk off. Of course, there was no dried leaves there, but I mean, we didn't hear it come, didn't hear it walk off. All we heard it do was bust through that wall. And, 6 of us saw it. I mean, it wasn't just me. It was 6 of us saw this thing. And I was interviewed one time by a Canadian film company that was doing a show on, it wasn't a blog. They were doing a documentary on Sasquatches. And Craig Jorgensen, who was the first cab LRP, wrote several books. Craig wrote a book about weird things that happened in Vietnam, and he had heard about this sighting and called me and he said, "You mind if I put that story in my book?" Well, they had read the story, so they called me and they sent a guy down from Canada, did an interview with me, and they said, "Would you be willing to go back over there to that spot?" And I said, "What? No, I'm not going back to Nam." I said, "I'm too old to climb that mountain again, but I got a map of it, and I know the exact coordinates where that happened." And I brought out a topo map, and I showed them exactly where that happened. And supposedly they sent a film crew over there and interviewed a bunch of villagers and stuff. And they called me back when it was over, and they said, "Well, there's a farm growing there now." And I said, "You didn't go, because there was no farm growing on the side of this hill." I said, "This was a steep mountain. You might have been a farm at the base of it, but you didn't go up to the coordinates I gave you." And he admitted they didn't climb that mountain. I said, "That thing, it was about 30 yards from the crest of that mountaintop. And it was a wide top on the mountain. And we found that base camp on the back side, which was more gentle sloping." And I said, "That thing came down off the top of that mountain to that row of brush and busted through that brush." I said, I remember on the contour map where it was. So I mean, for what it's worth, I don't even know if it's comfortable talking about it now, but that happened to a team I was on. I can still name the 5 other guys on that team, and we 3 of them showed up at a reunion. We talked about it at the reunion. And I explained to them what I had read about the Penang Orang, and none of them had researched it, but they remember it happening. The other 2 guys are dead. Matter of fact, Tony Cicero died 3 years ago during the pandemic. But I swear to God, that happened to us.
I mean, I've heard of tales and read of stuff about either force recon teams or A teams out on patrol coming across weird things, and that is. I've always been curious if anybody's ever seen a Sasquatch or anything.
Well, there's been other American soldiers that have run into them. There was a platoon that ran into one night that threw rocks at them, and they saw it. That's why they knew it wasn't monkeys or something doing it. We saw elephant dung and followed elephant trails before, because the NVA would often use elephants to bring in rockets, but never saw the elephants. I've heard tigers chuffing at night. You could hear them huffing, they do, but they never came close to our perimeter. We woke everybody up. We got followed by rock apes that threw sticks and stuff at us. I walked around a bend in a trail walking point one time and was looking face to face to a king cobra I killed with a Sten gun. Fired 30 rounds and hit it once, and it was 12 feet long. We laid dog in a bamboo thicket one time. Ron Rucker was on the patrol, and we look around. There's eight bamboo vipers coiled up, sleeping in the bamboo thicket with us. We had to sit there for an hour with these snakes. None of them were active; they were all sleeping. But we had to share that bamboo thicket until it was clear. We left the area. I sat down on the patrol with Ron Rucker was on that patrol. and he pointed like this to the ground, and I looked down, and I'm sitting on a bamboo viper. It's trying to get out from under me. My rucksack was pinning it to the ground. But they can't, a bamboo viper doesn't have fangs. They're like a coral snake. They got to bite you between the fingers or something. And I moved to let it crawl away, and it crawled away. We were tearing down an old bunker one time, and a banded crate came flying out of that bunker, and they're fast. I mean, thank God it wasn't heading for any of us, and we all backed away, let this thing flee. But we had those kind of all the time. I was laying on one night on a patrol in a thicket with a guy named Shorty Ellsbury laying next to me, and we were in an area where they were launching rockets at Camp Eagle, and our job was to nab one of those rocket teams. And later that night, they launched 3 rockets from about 100 yards away from us. We're laying there on our backs, and you could see the moon through the top of the single canopy that we were laying in. And all of a sudden, we see this. I thought it was a rat or a squirrel climbing around this tree, and it was a mongoose. And all of a sudden, the limb broke, and it fell on Shorty Ellsbury's stomach. It was trying to run away, and it ended up pulling his shirt all the way up to here before it finally got traction and ran off. And he's laying there like this, shaking next to me. That happened. So, I mean, when you're laying there at night in the jungle, my first team leader told me, anything that crawls over you at night, whatever you do, don't slap it. So, I mean, I don't know how many times I laid there and had a snake crawl across my legs, or I sat on a log one time taking a break. One of them big black and orange centipedes about that long ran underneath my legs. So there's all kinds of stuff over there that you see. You learn not to fear it. You learn not to slap it. You learn to just appreciate what it is and leave it alone.
Like Jurassic Park or something.
Very much so. It's stuff you don't see in Missouri.
Yeah, or Alabama for that
matter. I still have nightmares about that spider web.
Oh, that's snakes and spiders are I'm not good with either of those.
Snakes don't bother me, but spiders, I don't even touch a granddaddy long legs.
We've come up here coming up on 2 hours and 15 minutes. I was gonna see if you'd be interested in coming back for a part 2 with us.
Yeah. After Christmas?
Yes, sir. If you be, because I'm gonna finish up reading some books. We'll actually finish up Phantom Warrior and then start your edition of Six Silent Men. And was gonna see if you'd come back after Christmas and speak with us.
Yeah, my other books are all mission stories about other teams that were on missions.
Yes,
so they're
sir.
all short. Big Net is on missions.
These are
the best way.
These 2 are his personal tour. That's why I was showing those earlier. These are his 68 and 69 tour, and they're broken down I like the way he did it. He does month each day, something big going on or something that to remember. It's almost like reading his personal journal to be quite honest.
My fiance I wrote 283 letters to her. And she wrote me every day I was over there. That was our deal. If she'd write a letter every day, I would try to answer as many as possible. And there were days I would write 12 letters and give them to a friend of mine. And when I was out on patrol, he'd send a letter out each day. So she wouldn't know what was going on. When she kept those letters, that enabled me to reconstruct my tour, because I never could have done that without those letters.
Gosh, thank goodness she had the foresight or either the sentimentalness of keeping those letters, because the whole flow of the book is in my opinion, it just makes it so much better the way it's set up like that. It's outstanding.
It was the only way I could write it, to be honest with you. I mean, I didn't even know. I was just going to write the main stuff I remembered for my boys. And when I read those letters, I thought, my God, this is my tour. The details are there. The guys that were on the missions were there. So it enabled me to do something I should have done in Vietnam, was to keep a diary, but they told us not to keep a diary.
Well, it's quickly become one of those books that I'll have on a separate bookshelf, because I'll be taking it out to reread each year. It's amazing. We've got one more question. I will hit this before we end.
Okay.
Robert was wanting to know, did y'all know about SOG? Oh, clearly y'all did, working with them. Did y'all look up to them? It's cool to hear about them help training y'all, and did they work together at all for any in-country operations with y'all?
They were the ultimate good guys to us. I mean, they were the pros. We were the amateurs. We know that some of the guys that were in other LRP units actually went and did training with some of the B teams. So I mean, they worked with special forces. We trained at their base camp. We had some friends that were in CCNN, and we traded. That's how we got our U.S. made tiger fatigues from the SOG guys.
Okay.
I couldn't wear the Vietnamese tiger fatigues. I was too big. So for me to wear tiger fatigues, I had to go down to FOB1 and get them there. And they were the good tiger fatigues. Matter of fact, when I got hit by lightning, that was the only time I wore that pair. I wanted to take them home, and they cut them off me in the hospital. And I was trying to talk them into unbuttoning them and taking them off, but they scissored them off. And today I know what those uniforms are worth.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they're worth a lot of money. But we had a relationship with them, and I think we looked up to them as our seniors. They had bigger cojones than we had.
It's hard to compare y'all's cojones sizes because y'all were both doing some insane stuff, and I find it interesting because to close, they did, before I hand it off to Mr. Gary to close. They did have SOG guys that or you had LRP guys that went into SOG, and then you also had SOG men who were done running recon, who went to the Rangers when the Rangers were stood up. One of the most famous in that case is after Fred Zabatowski was awarded his Medal of Honor, he went and served with, I think he was with F Company in 1970, I believe, but he went and served with the Rangers. So
which F Company?
Of the 75th, or L Company of the 75th.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He was there as a senior NCO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what just outstanding man. So there is all that cross hibernation, and I mean, with y'all, training with them at CCN. I mean, there you go. I mean, that's as close as you can get to without being in.
They were more secrets. I mean, you couldn't get too close to them because they wouldn't allow it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the fact that we could do our rappelling training there, I don't know who worked that out, but I mean, that was great that they did. And we knew about them, believe me. Some of our weapons came from them. The CAR-15s we were at the end of the food chain up north. So, by the time the Air Force guys got the brand new CAR-15s, the ones we got were the ones that the rifling was shot at by SOG guys. And we traded them just to have those. Because it took me 6 months to get one. I carried an M16 for the first 6 months. The only way we could get one was to trade SOG guys for an old one, or one of our guys went home that had one.
Wow.
And they were more reliable than the 16s were.
Oh yeah, you quickly make that apparent in your book how deadly efficient you guys were with y'all's CAR-15s. Since we're gonna have you back after I get done reading, and hopefully those of y'all that have not gotten his books or don't have all of his books will get them and read along. Was there anything else you would like to close with for tonight?
Yeah, if you'd like to do an interview with Larry Chambers or Ken Miller or Ray Martinez or Craig Jorgensen, I'd be happy to let them know. I'm sure they'd be willing to do it.
We would absolutely love to have any and all of those gentlemen on. Absolutely. I'll be getting in touch with you offline about that.
Super.
Yeah. Well, sir, we thank you greatly. There's all kind of thank yous coming in, and we'll definitely be already looking forward to part 2, as am I. I'll stay in touch with you, and we'll plan after the holidays to get you back on and have a part 2.
Well, thanks for having me, bud.
Absolutely. I hope you have a great evening, and I will be in touch with you here in the coming days.
You too. You take care.
Yes, sir. See you later.
Uh-huh.